In this video, we will count down the top 3 terrifying punishments of the old American frontier. The year is 1849. You are one of the thousands of people who have come out west seeking gold and fortune in California. But it's not all sunshine and rainbows out here. It's dangerous, lonely, and brutal. And when people break the law out here, the punishment is even more terrifying than the crimes themselves. Welcome back, everyone, to my channel. Today we're exploring the Wild West and counting down the top 3 terrifying punishments of the old American frontier. So grab your 6-shooters and saddle up, because this is gonna be a rootin' tootin' good time. Let's get spooky. No? 3. Lynching. Lynching was a very real fear during the old American frontier. Now, you may be thinking that the worst part of lynching is being hanged. And don't worry, we'll get to that. But there were many types of lynching, and not all of them involved hanging. It just depended on what part of the country you were in. In the South, it was common for accused criminals to be put to death by a group of men before trial. These men would usually belong to a mob or a committee of safety, and they would punish someone for crimes like theft, rape, and murder. They would do this by flogging them, beating them with a whip or cat o' nine tails until they were dead. And sometimes they would burn the condemned alive. Now, in other parts of the country, like Texas, lynching meant something entirely different. There, the condemned would be tied up and left out in the desert without water or food. Sometimes these people would die from dehydration or starvation, but other times they would be killed by predators or simply wander off into the desert and never be seen again. But let's talk about the most common form of lynching of all, hanging. During the old American frontier, there were many cases of people being lynched by angry mobs. Usually these people had committed heinous crimes and the police were unable or unwilling to punish them. So the townspeople would take the law into their own hands. The person to be lynched would usually be given a trial by jury of the mob, and if found guilty, they would be sentenced to death by hanging. Sometimes the condemned person would be allowed to make a final speech before their death, and others would be given the chance to confess their sins or repent before they died. After they were hanged, the body would often be left hanging as a warning to other would-be criminals. This was especially common in cases of people who had committed crimes against women or children. In some cases, the bodies of the lynched people were mutilated after they were dead. This was done to humiliate the victim or to send a message to other potential targets of the killer. One of the most famous cases of lynching in American history is the lynching of Jesse James. James was a notorious outlaw and member of the James Younger gang. He was killed in a shootout with police in St. Joseph, Missouri. His body was then taken by a mob and hung from a nearby tree. Number 2 is death by hanging. During the old American frontier, hanging was the most common punishment for serious crimes. It was also one of the most gruesome and terrifying ways to die. Before the invention of anesthesia, people could be hanged in public as a warning to other would-be criminals. The process of hanging was also quite lengthy. The condemned person would first be placed on a platform in front of a crowd of spectators. A noose was then placed around their neck and a trapdoor was opened beneath their feet. As the person swung in the air, the rope would tighten around their neck, cutting off their oxygen supply. They would then slowly begin to suffocate. The whole process could take several minutes, and during that time, the person would be struggling for air, thrashing around and making gurgling noises. One of the most famous hangings in American history was that of Lincoln's assassin, John Wilkes Booth. After being shot by an actor named Lincoln, Booth managed to escape for 12 days. He was finally cornered in a Virginia barn and shot by an African-American Union soldier named Boston Corbett. Booth's body was then hung from a tree on the same property where he was killed. No. 1. The law of retribution. The old American frontier was a dangerous place to live. There were all kinds of outlaws and gunslingers running around, and if you weren't careful, you could easily be killed or injured. If you did manage to survive, you might find yourself in court facing one of the most terrifying punishments of all, the law of retribution. The law of retribution was a legal principle that was widely accepted in the old American frontier. It basically meant that if you committed a crime, you could be punished in a way that was intended to be equal to the crime you committed. So, for example, if you killed someone, you could be killed. Or if you robbed a stagecoach, you could have your hands cut off. Now, you're probably thinking that this sounds absolutely insane, and you're not wrong, but it was actually the accepted way of doing things at the time. People believed that this was a fair way to administer justice, because it gave victims or their families the opportunity to get revenge. But it wasn't always as straightforward as it sounds. For example, what if the person who committed the crime was also killed? In that case, the punishment would be carried out on someone else close to the criminal, like their family members or friends. This could be a bit tricky though, because sometimes the only surviving family member might be a young child. But under the law of retribution, children were held just as accountable for their parents' crimes as adults, so that child would have to be punished as well. One of the most famous cases of the law of retribution being carried out was the case of the Mountain Meadows Massacre. In 1857, a group of Mormon fundamentalists attacked and killed 120 immigrants who were traveling through Utah. The attackers were never brought to justice, but eventually the U.S. government forced the Mormons to pay $10,000 to the families of the victims as compensation. But this wasn't really seen as a punishment, rather as a fine. The government then decided to carry out the law of retribution on the ringleaders of the massacre. They were all tried and convicted in federal court and sentenced to death by firing squad. Thanks for watching. Thank you so much for watching. Did any of these punishments scare you more than the others? Which one was the most terrifying to you? Do you think the law of retribution is ever justified? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget to like and subscribe so you never miss an episode. We'll see you next time. Bye.